Hello and welcome to this special podcast brought to you by the CSF. Today we'll be discussing the global COVID-19 Rheumatology Registry. My name is Peter Nash from the Griffith University, and today I'm joined by Professor Philip Robinson, who currently works at Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital in Hurston in sunny downtown Brisbane in Queensland. So welcome, Philip, and thank you very much for your time. It must be a very busy time for you at the moment. With lockdown and everything going on. Firstly, how are you coping with all that COVID-19? Has it made a huge difference to the way you practice medicine?
Oh, look, we initially used a lot of telehealth to try and address things. That's coming back a little bit when the realities of obviously clinical care has meant you need to look after more people. And when the reality of the fact that we didn't have so much of a problem here in Brisbane sort of became clear as well. So we're able to probably be slightly more relaxed than certainly many other places in the world, yeah.
So we're very fortunate today. We want to discuss with you the global COVID-19 registry and the Alliance and how important it is to collect data on rheumatology patients. So can you give us a bit of the history of how that Alliance got together and how the registry got started?
Well, it's funny, it's one of those things is that essentially it was just a discussion that we were really having on Twitter amongst a number of us. I'd been watching Twitter in early March quite closely to sort of see what was happening with this, because certainly the previous coronavirus issues hadn't really been, SARS-1 and MERS hadn't really turned out to be worldwide problems. But this one was sort of looking a bit different. So I was actually on holiday in New Zealand at the time, and just sort of looking at Twitter and the WHO in fact declared a pandemic, and that was sort of the first sign that really things were going pear-shaped, I suppose. And then we continuing discussions, and the next day Len Calabresi from Cleveland sort of flagged to a big group of us that the IBD guys were putting together a consortium. And, we just sort of said, hey, look, that seems like a really sensible thing to do. And it wasn't clear to any of us that were having in the discussion that this was being done already. So so that it sort of started from there. And people discussed about whether we should do it on REDCap, which is sort of a research registered and database system, and certainly have REDCap at the University of Queensland, and Janus Yazdani at UCSF also had REDCap. And essentially, I end up Zooming Janus Yazdani at UCSF, zoomed into her research group. She runs a large research group that does a lot of registry work. And essentially, we decided at that point that we should just get it going, and so that's really how it started. And then it sort of snowballed from there, with huge numbers of people saying, "Hey, I want to help," and then it's really just gone from there.
So, what were the objectives of the registry?
Well, it was very clear to us that that this was potentially going to be a problem for our patients. Certainly, they've got underlying immune dysfunction anyway, the vast majority do. And then we don't really help situations by adding on immunosuppressants or immunomodulators on top of that. And so we thought, well, things are potentially bad from the underlying disease, and things could potentially be made even worse by the drugs we use. And then there were these discussions about also circulating about how our drugs, in fact, might be helpful. Hydroxychloroquine and IL-6 inhibitors primarily, but there's also discussion about, JAK kinase inhibitors and other things like that. So there was really multiple reasons to start collecting information about our patients and the drugs they're on, what effect they might have. So that was really the objective, yeah.
How do you go about letting people know it even exists?
Well, we sort of have a loyal following on Twitter, and we've also got some amazing IT people as well. And so we essentially did it via Twitter and via email, and people who are interested, we sign them up, and then essentially a lot of the fellows or registrars got involved and they flagged it and they said, hey, look, we'll go to our division and we'll go to our hospital network and we'll tell all our people. So it sort of worked out being sort of a network effect, which was fantastic because we just sort of
mushroom from there. So what are your numbers just at the moment to give the audience an idea just how successful this has been?
Well, the webpage currently was updated a few days ago at 1,072, but I'd be very confident that we're well north of that now, probably around 1,200. The Europeans are progressively bringing on additional countries. There are certainly a number of, logistical issues that, happy to talk about that mean that there are delays in bringing on stream. And then there are a number of big US cities that are also working through the same logistical issues. And so when they come on stream, you get big jumps in numbers. So, so we're probably about 1,200 at this point.
So I did see that the EULAs have a registry. Is it a combined registry or they just collect and give it to you?
Well,
the data, I mean.
It's a collaboration, essentially because it started off as a global collective, and we said we want to make this a global thing. And then essentially we wanted to bring everyone in, and it became clear based on the European data regulations that it was going to be far easier to set up an instance of the registry in Europe for a number of different reasons. And so essentially that registry sits in the University of Manchester for purely logistical and regulatory reasons. But the data from that, it's labelled as the EULA registry, flows to the global registry and it gets combined and we disseminate as one entity, really. It's a really awesome sort of precious partnership that everyone's come to the table on and everyone's been very happy to get involved with, which is really fantastic.
It certainly is a very nice collaboration. Where's all your data kept and how did you kind of know what to extract, what form, the shape, the shape of the form and questions to ask?
Yeah, well, so the data is kept physically. The global data is collected at UCSF and the European data is collected at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. What are we collecting? We wanted to strike a balance between completeness and the information that we needed, but also with essentially pragmatism. We knew that if people were asking people to sit down for half an hour, it just wasn't going to happen. And we don't need that much information. So it's a matter of balance between, hey, this is the information that we think would be useful, but then we were very careful because, of course, we got people saying, hey, I want you to add this and hey, I want you to add that. And at each of those junctures, we said, is that really worth the extra time? And so, for example, people said, look, I think it would be valuable to have lab data. And we said, yeah, but we made that a really optional part of it. So if you've got time and you're keen and you want to put it in, when you put a case in, you can put in lab data or you can just bypass that.
So there's a steering committee who makes those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, so there's a steering committee of around 11 members that sort of lead each of the core parts of the alliance. And so we discuss those sort of issues amongst ourselves and decide sort of where we sit on those things, yeah.
Super. Can you tell us a bit about the patient survey?
So yeah, so the patient survey was in response to really a number of things. One, really recognising that this is a pretty scary situation for patients to be in, especially when lots of the media said, hey, don't worry, most people are fine except vulnerable people. And if you think about it, that's fine for the majority of the population, but if you're labelled one of those vulnerable people, you're like, well, what about me? So you realize that it's potentially a really scary situation when all the media is saying, don't worry unless you're vulnerable. Well, and they weren't really addressing the vulnerable people. So patients don't have good information just because, I mean, we don't have good information either. And also there's a very clear, or we were very clear that we thought there would be bias in putting in the patients that were put into the physician-reported registry. Because if you think about it, if you're well, you know, generally well, but you're worried, you go to a fever clinic, you get a swab, you go home, you get a phone call 24 hours later, you're COVID positive, stay at home until you're unwell. You're not necessarily going to, you know, ever go anywhere in front of a doctor. You would have obviously dealt with nurses at the fever clinic or a doctor who swabbed you, but you may never be in front of a doctor. So you may have COVID, you may be on a biological, you may have a rheumatic disease, but you never actually get to the point where a doctor will see you and put your information in the registry. So therefore, we're potentially going to get a more serious or more affected group that gets put into the registry. And so we said, well, if we ask patients directly, A, what's their experience of the pandemic and how they're doing? And then, are you affected? You know, what are your manifestations? What drugs are you on? Those sort of things. Then we can sort of address both of those issues. So that's where the patient survey came along.
And you've got a very large number of patients.
Yeah, we're up over 11,000 now, which is pretty amazing.
Pretty
like
impressive,
we didn't have any idea what sort of pickup that would get, but we've been pretty impressed by that, and the numbers are still coming in.
And tell the audience about the Lancet publication that you've already put out there, maybe when, so they could track it down, and a little bit about what it showed.
Yeah, so the Lancet publication was published on about the 16th of April, if I remember correctly, and essentially it was our first 110 patients that were entered in the physician registry. And essentially it's a very descriptive analysis. So it describes the diseases that they have, which, you know, to summarize, is a pretty typical rheumatic cohort. So there's lots of rheumatoids, psoriatics, there's lupus and SPA, you know, ankylosing spondylitis, axial spondyloarthritis, and then there's the fine print there. Then it goes through the medications that they're on, which, you know, to our point previously, probably reflects the severer cohort, because around 45% are on biologics, but there's 60% are on traditional DMARDs, including the antimalarials, and then along with the other medications as well. And then it describes their manifestations or their presentations, because one of certainly the things that you know, we worry about when people are on immunosuppressants is, do they not present in the same way? You know, do they actually present in a subtle way, or do they decompensate and we don't even know? Well, that described that patients present with cough and fever and the typical things that have been described in other cohorts. And then it described our admission rate, which is around 35%, and our death rate, the death rate in that first cohort, which was about 5%. And so it was essentially to put out some information out there and say, look, these are our patients, and this is essentially the first lot of information out of the database. It's freely available from the Lancet Rheumatology website, and also from our website. There's links to it there if people are interested and want to know more.
So was hydroxychloroquine protective in any way in your cohort?
No. So it's interesting you asked that. So we also had a publication published today that was a correspondence in annals of rheumatic diseases, and that again specifically addresses this point. And hydroxychloroquine was not protective in lupus patients. So despite what prominent politicians might say, yeah, and that's also freely available on the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases online first site if people are interested. The actual table, the interesting table, is actually in the supplementary data, but click on the link and it will open up the table, and that clearly you can see the numbers that it's not protected.
Excellent. Hey, you know, I'm getting the impression, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, that our patients seem to be almost less at risk being immunosuppressed without drugs, because I expected so many more of them around the world to have a problem. Is that just because you only see your own little capture of patients, or is that a feeling that's sort of distilled down through the ether?
Yeah, look, I agree. So we've got data that's look, literally very close to being published that will help to answer this question. But there is already lots of published data out there, just small data sets showing that patients generally do fine on biologics, on traditional oral DMARDs, often do fine. And so I would agree that that sort of gestalt that you've got is likely to be correct. And some of the discussions about whether medications are protective or not, there's data that we're going to publish, and there's sort of data that's coming out of the IBD registry as well. That's certainly going to try and address some of those things too. But
so do you mind if we cover off a couple of those things, like any evidence from what you've seen that NSAIDs are actually bad unless they've got renal impairment or some other issue?
No, so there's no evidence that I've seen that that NSAIDs are bad. Yeah, but one of the problems with looking at NSAIDs is that because they're prescription, because often they're over the counter, they're often not potentially recorded in the way that we would hope, more rigorously when prescription medications are recorded. And so, the issues with collecting that information, even in patients that might be reported to our registry or patients that are collected from, for example, hospital administration systems, if the admitting doctor doesn't take the time to ask that question, then it's not going to get recorded and we're not going to have good data. So even if people come out and say they're not protective or they're at risk, I would certainly say I would really want to be very carefully looking at the way that data was collected before I put a huge amount of weight on it.
Okay. And steroids, the patients are always very hung up about steroids and what to do with them. What are you recommending?
Look, steroids are a risk for lots of reasons, but also steroids are often used in patients with more severe disease. And patients with more severe disease often have more comorbidities. And so if we were to purely look at patients on steroids versus not patients on steroids, and you don't very carefully control for comorbidities, you are potentially going to get an inaccurate picture. Look, I suspect that we're going to see that higher doses of steroids are going to be are going to lead to poorer outcomes, but we see that in every single other case when steroids are used. So I don't think that's going to be a earth-shattering observation if that's what comes out.
And can you comment a bit on IL-6 inhibitors and the little baricitinib anecdote?
Yeah, look, I would say that we really do not have enough information right now and even the information we have, you've got to be very clear that it's prone to selection, significantly prone to selection bias. But just looking at the registry, we really don't have the numbers to actually make discussions about that and to really generate information that we're able to really solidly use. I think we're going to have to look to the clinical trials that hopefully shouldn't be too far off being reported. I know that the French have put out a press release and that they've got their data in review. And so I'd hope to see it pretty soon, because I've seen some astronomically short review times of 2 days, for example. And editors asking me to review stuff within 2 days or 1 day. So there's lots of that going on.
Yeah. Like he's on their editorial board or something, that French guy. Anyway, so you're planning to maintain this longer term? Say the whole thing fizzles in 6 months when the vaccine magically appears. Are you going to keep it going? What's the plan with the data sort of in the longer term?
Well, that's a great question, because in reality, I don't think we're going to see a coronavirus vaccine in 6, 12, 18, 24 months, right? Vaccinating 6 billion people or some fraction of that is a pretty mammoth exercise. So I think COVID-19 and coronavirus is going to be relevant for a while yet. But after that, I think that there's been a really nice demonstration that, at least in a crisis situation, we get really great pull together of the global rheumatology community. And if we can continue to leverage that for things that maybe we've got an advantage. If you think about, there might be large rheumatoid arthritis cohorts in big cities and in big research centres, but what potentially might a global organisation be able to really leverage? And that might be low frequency things like low frequency diseases or low frequency drug use or adverse reactions to drugs or those sort of things. So certainly it's been some passing discussion about what might happen, but in reality, we have been way too busy trying to manage what we're dealing with right now. But certainly that's something that, people have been saying, hey, look, maybe this can carry on in another form and do good and continue to leverage the collaboration that we've put together.
So you're probably running it on goodwill at the moment. Do you think you'll need some funding longer term to store the data and data mine the data? NHMRC or some EULA grant or, something. It's all done goodwill at the moment, which is fantastic. But as it gets bigger and bigger and as months go by, you might just need some funding.
Yes, so that's really front of mind because we've all got day jobs and, a lot of us are academics, but we've all got existing research that, has either gone into hibernation or is done at 3 a.m. in the morning as well. So yeah, we're actively working with that, and we've had offers from a number of people in industry to support us, and that's just something we're working through right now. So to facilitate that, we have technically become a section of the ACR to allow all the expertise that the ACR has to try and help us to do the things that we're not good at, like finance and negotiating with funding partners. So, we're very clear in the ACR is that they want to support and foster the global collaboration that we have. But they also want to support us to be the best we can be. And so that's why they're helping with us. And that's why we were very happy for them to help us. But we very much value the links that we have with both EULA and with the rest of the world collaborators that we have. And we think that's a pretty special thing, what's ended up forming, and we want to keep that. So that would be the longitudinal goal would be to maintain our global focus.
So from your experience so far, we're telling our patients, stay on your drugs until you get sick and then stop them. Any take-home messages from what you've seen and experienced so far?
Yeah, so I would be doing exactly that, and that's what my patients, that's what I tell my patients. Clearly, there are some patients who say, look, I'm not interested and I'm just going to stop my drugs anyway, and that's their prerogative, that's fine. But I would generally leave my patients on their medications. The hydroxychloroquine issue, people are like, what should I do with this? Look, I think we just leave patients as they are. Probably looking at the pharmacokinetics of hydroxychloroquine, you probably need a lot more. And when you take a lot more, the safety side of it and the toxicity side of it becomes so much more relevant. So until we get adequate clinical trials, I'm just telling patients to stay exactly on what they are. And if they get unwell, I would encourage them to get tested, obviously, and if they're interested, fill out the physician survey, the patient survey, which is on our site. And if physicians are interested, I would tell them to enroll their patients, and there's lots of information on our website. And we're releasing information all the time, like we did today in Annals, and we will be very shortly releasing a significant paper with 600 patients, which is just in the final stages of getting in revision. So, but I wouldn't. I would carry on, and I would stick with really the advice that generally most people have been given, including the ACR and other major organisations, which is stay on your meds, because the adverse events associated with going off them in a pretty uncertain benefit.
Yeah, and then they flare and they wind up on higher doses of steroids, and it goes round and round.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where can patients find more information and resources? How do they find the registry, and how do they fill out stuff and log on and do all that?
Yeah, so it's we try to make it really easy. So if you go to our website, which is rheum-covid.org, you can see that there's very clear buttons for the patient survey, and that's available in multiple languages. That leverages our awesome global collaborators to help. And then from a physician survey point of view, there's very clear buttons there. Now there's 3 different places that you'll land up if you're doing the physician survey. One is the Global Pediatric Survey, which is run out of Boston, and that's separate to us, but very early on we found that we decided that it would make most sense for pediatric experts in registry data to collect that. So we're very, very supportive of that, and that's what we're linking to, but that's linked through our page. And then if you're from a European area or a EULA country, because there are some EULA countries outside of Europe, then you'll get linked through to the EULA registry. And the EULA registry and the global registry are the same. There's no complicated sign-on or passwords. You put your details in, and the details are simply to allow us to give you the opportunity to add further information in the future. So for example, if you have a patient that you know, and maybe you see one of your own patients in hospital, you go and see them, you collect the information, you want to contribute, and we'd love you to. You put it in, you find out later that in fact they became more unwell maybe and went to ICU, and then they were discharged and went home. You can then give us that additional information by using the links that we send you when you put in the initial information. So we obviously, we don't want you to put in the patients too early, because we don't know certainly about potential outcomes, but then if you put in the information and you need to update it, there's certainly that capacity there too. And the survey should really take between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on, if you've got all the information in front of you. We don't aim for it to be onerous. And if you have any problems, you just email the website, email that email address on our homepage. And if you've got any questions about things like ethics, then you just talk to us, really. The registry is being deemed not for patient research in the entire of the United States and in multiple countries in Europe. And so if you've got questions about ethics or IRBs or anything, you just let us know, and we've got a team that will help you address that in your country if that's something that you want to find out more about, or if you want to help.
No, I think it's a fantastic collaboration, and you're to be congratulated for all your hard work. I was so impressed with the immediacy of Twitter, the instantaneous information that you can get quite easily, updated, the things that you don't quite catch or you catch 2 days later, it's there immediately. So it's very impressive. Any final thoughts or comments you'd like to make?
Look, I would actually just really like to thank the global rheumatology community for supporting this. And I really want to thank everyone who is involved with the Alliance. So the Alliance is doing other things as well, as opposed to the registries, including literature searches, and we have lots of teams of people who are working away, and we've had lots of people who are working on things like country-specific ethics. We've got an amazing steering committee that are just working all hours of the day and night on this data. So we've got an amazing group of people, but that still wouldn't be enough if we didn't have rheumatologists out there all over the world, and it's over 40 countries have contributed to putting patients in the registry. Because, if you put the patients in, we get the data and we can report it back to you and help you look after your patients. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and I'm just so I'm I'm so thankful that everyone's come on board, and I really want to extend the thanks of myself and the steering committee and everyone from the Alliance for the contributions that everyone has made.
So thank you very much for your time, Phil. It was greatly appreciated. We hope our discussion has provided a comprehensive overview of the COVID-19 registry, objectives, protocols, procedures. We also hope you feel motivated to put all the audience to put their own patients and the patient's data and the patients encouraged to do the surveys into your registry, and hope to go a long way to informing future decisions regarding the treatment of COVID-19 in patients with rheumatic disease. And we sincerely hope you're staying safe, and we wish you well in your practice. All the very best, Philip. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.